Hello, I'm Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. Thank you very much for joining us again on another episode and helping us spread the word on mental health, substance abuse, and addiction, and also joining this journey that we're on. We all have mental health issues. No one is immune to this, and I think that's one of the stigmas that Amy and I are going to talk about today. Is I don't think a human being's ever lived ever in the history of us that's not had some issues with mental health. So today I'm really excited, super excited. I've known Amy for a while. She's one of many people that I have met that I consider a friend, but I've never met face to face, which that is soon about to change. And we'll talk about that a little bit today. So with that, Amy Olseth is from the beautiful part of our country, Boise, Idaho. I've never been to Idaho. But I know, Amy, people confuse Idaho and Iowa all the time. I don't know if you get asked about corn. But I get asked about potatoes all the time.
Oh yeah. I have to constantly redirect and do a mini geography lesson and say, I'm over here by Washington. I'm the potatoes and the gems.
Well, you have a wonderful part of the United States and part of the world, and I'm looking forward to meeting you here shortly.
Yeah, me too.
Well, Amy, I think you and I have a lot to talk about. I know we could talk, and we have talked for a long time. Off air on LinkedIn. You've been on a live stream with me with Patrick Moore, which we'll talk a little bit about Patrick and some of his work. And I think I'll throw this out like I do a lot of guests. Why do you think I drug you on the Living Undeterred podcast?
Well, I think that you're seeking perspectives, and I think that you like to pull from a variety of specialties and walks of life and experiences, and that's how you've become knowledgeable in the field. So maybe I just think that you're interested in my perspective. I'm on the front line of a lot of this, and I think it's a perspective we don't hear. We don't hear a lot about the nursing front line of mental health and substance use. And then you add the intervention side of me, and it's kind of I think it's a cool perspective that I'm hoping provides insight. And you have a lot of great projects, and you have a lot of great energy, and hopefully my energy that I put out to you sucked up a little bit. And I think we were meant to talk and meant to work together on some things.
Yeah,
is that why you
sometimes
drug
you
me
just
on?
kind of feel like, yeah, one of many reasons. One thing I really liked, I think what attracted me to your content, obviously we met on LinkedIn where, with COVID and everything, I think social media is where we meet everybody today. But you have an edgy style to your presentations and to your comments and your posts, almost where you're kind of you're poking the bear a little bit. And I'm the same way. It's hard for me with ADD to just look for affirmation and post things that everybody likes. And I'm not looking for followers. I'm looking for people that want to make a difference. There's some people that just like and comment and share. Then there's others that actually trying to make a difference. I see what you do as the latter. And, sometimes you can get into some healthy conversations with people. I'll leave it at that.
Yes.
And I like that, Amy. I think, obviously the way we're doing things isn't working.
Right.
When my son Seth died of a heroin overdose on October 4th, 2016, 56,000 Americans died that year of overdose. You know the numbers. I don't have to tell you, Amy. Anyone knows the numbers, being on the front lines as an RN. In 2020, it was like 96,000. I think the numbers are still kind of coming in. That's like a 72% increase from when my son died. What the hell is going on? We know more about this stuff than we've ever known in the history of society. What gives? Well, what's going on, Amy? I'm perplexed. I'm frustrated. I'm confused.
I'm right there with you. And if I had the answers to what was going on, then I'd be much better equipped to fix it for sure. I think the one thing we do have to acknowledge about those numbers, because as much as I love numbers, I do tend to steer away from them a little bit, in all honesty, because I think that the way the reporting is coming in, and the awareness and the scrutiny on the data is starting to increase as well. So I think it's clear it's getting worse. To the true extent of when it started getting worse, and how much worse, I don't think we have a clear handle on, and won't for quite some time. And there's a lot of information overload, a lot of people using numbers. And I don't think that we were talking about it as much. So anytime you bring something to light, reporting metrics can change and such. And I think deaths that were reported as something else previously are now being properly reported. So not to discount the numbers at all, but that's why a lot of people say, Amy, why don't you quote the data, or why don't you quote the numbers? And you'll notice a lot of times I stay clear of that. Because I can't get my head around the accuracy of it at all times. But what I do know is what I'm seeing direct in my community. I know what I'm seeing on front lines, and I know the type of calls and inquiries I'm getting. To me, that's very tangible. And there's been a huge shift towards, it's not young people anymore. It's not just the Seths. I'm seeing the ramifications now of the opioid epidemic that started in 2000. So, it from use to recognition of disease to progression of severe disease, that can take a decade. And so I think a lot of what we're seeing now are people that have become dependent over years, and now their use is escalating. And I think that that's a factor just based on the type of clients I work with. This didn't just happen last year. This has been going on for a long time for them. And, I could go on and on about big pharm and opioid crisis and opioid epidemic, but prescribing restrictions are only getting tighter. It's very difficult to find prescribers that will engage in narcotics or benzodiazepines. And so people that sought relief in those ways are now having to find alternative and less safe ways to deal with whatever their underlying condition is. So the medical community has a responsibility here.
I use the analogy, Amy, that it's like putting out a forest fire and we're running around with thimbles. And we're just dumping water on these little fires, and we go after big pharma, and then something else happens. And I've kind of philosophically, when this first happened, and obviously, you're aware my wife passed away as well recently, due to complications that I'll leave it private at this point, but I think people can kind of figure out after our son died, kind of how that effect had on her. But if you look at the numbers across the board, I don't care what you look at, quality of life, happiness levels, suicide, overdoses, alcoholism, mental health issues, you name it, all the numbers are higher. You'd have to really look hard to find some area of mental health that's improved. Now, that doesn't mean we quit, right?
Everything is escalating.
Obviously, I've got, you're right. And so I always, I got two boys, Ian and Roman still. And, I got two of my three. From that perspective, I'm actually a very fortunate man. You've met Steve Grant. He lost his only two boys to heroin overdoses. So, there's always somebody that has it worse than me. And that's one of the driving forces in my life is to find similar people that we can talk about not what happened to us, but the success stories. That there's always a way to go back into your life and rewrite your past. You're not obligated to live in whatever misery was either, bestowed on you either by accident or on purpose. You're not obligated to live there. And that's one of the driving forces in my Living Undeterred mission is to get people to say, you know what, I understand. You were an alcoholic. Your son died. You considered suicide, yet all that's happened doesn't have anything to do with what's going on right now at this particular moment in your life or tomorrow. And that's where I think as I do a deep dive into my journey, I'm coming out of it now a much better person, not a bitter person, as I like to say. So let me throw this out as a question to you. What is holistic interventions? I know what being holistic is, and I know what interventions are, but how does that go hand in hand, and where do you see that as an important part of what you do day to day?
Oh, thank you for asking. I appreciate it. It's a term that I came up with because I couldn't exactly describe what I do, what my mission is, what my purpose is, what my job is. And when I looked at all the characteristics of what I do, it's really the most fitting term. And so holism or holistic practice, it's a specialty in nursing, and it's also a term that's used widely. I mean, I think we're seeing it more. We're seeing it in treatment centers. We're seeing it in mental health. We have to treat a person holistically. And there's the definition, and then there's how I view it and how I explain it to the people I work is if you're coming to solve a particular problem, be ready to dissect it, because nothing lives in isolation. So a big part of what I do is breaking apart the pieces of an individual or a family's wellness from every angle. And there's different schools of thought on how many dimensions of wellness there are. But I go with about eight different areas of life that can either be impacted by substance use or mental health, or 8 factors that can contribute to it worsening. So if somebody, I put it out there to confuse people a little bit, honestly, because it's not going to be a simple intervention. It's going to be a dissection of what's going on, or we're not going to get anywhere. I also, with the intervention piece, I think, and you can tell me, but the majority of people I talk to associate the word intervention as a pretty severe or uncomfortable word. Like, you have to be really sick to get an intervention. Whereas in the nursing process, an intervention is simply what we do at a crossroad to make a decision. It's just a point.
Right.
So I use the holistic to kind of soften the word. And I'm also attempting with my content to destigmatize the word intervention, because we use it in the medical community, the nursing community, and it's a positive thing. We would hope for a good outcome with an intervention. So I kind of squash the two together to explain how I work. And that's that I look at everything, all the contributing factors, and then we come up with a plan. And that plan is intervening on whatever the underlying problem is. So long answer, it's how I identify as a practitioner, that I perform holistic interventions. And that isn't always surprising somebody and swooping them off to treatment. I very, very rarely do those stereotypical type of interventions. It's a very well thought out, long process for the family unit. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. And we talk a lot about collateral damage. And I want to ask you about that, about other family members. But how does the collateral damage concept affect you?
It affects me, for sure. I posted on LinkedIn just yesterday, that I was having a poopy day, and that it was just like some news came in, and it was just the cherry on the poop sundae. And I experience, it's two things. One, it's secondary trauma for me that I have to process and I have to be accountable for.
Right.
Anyone that works in mental health or a caring profession and says, oh, I don't have secondary trauma. Well, I don't know where you're working, but we're all exposed to other people's experiences, and we have to do something with it. It's okay that it happens, but we have to process our own pile, or it infiltrates our work. But the collateral damage or watching the impact on family members and community is another thing, Jeff, that's I ache for all the parties involved. So it's not just the addicted that I'm attempting to reach and heal, but the enormity of the family dynamics that come out when this problem is addressed. Honestly, I see why a lot of families don't want to address it, because it's very painful.
Absolutely.
Very
Absolutely.
painful to bring it all up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so
We went through that. Yep. I completely understand. Can I read something off your profile I thought was interesting?
oh goodness.
I got this off your profile, so I want to just read it, and then the people watching this can kind of think their own thoughts. But I thought this was so appropriate because I went through exactly what you say here. I was told long ago that every good addict has a loving support system until they burn every last bridge and have nothing. The nothing could be symbolic or it could be death. I have found this to be true in every case, and I've provided direct care to hundreds of patients and families. I read that on your profile this morning, and I thought, wow, that is so appropriate and so, for my life, so well timed. Because, if you go back and read my writings, I started the Living Undeterred project in January, but I write a lot about collateral damage and how a frustration I had was that when dealing with an addict or an alcoholic is this dual dynamic that they, one hand, can push us away, but then they criticize us for not helping.
Yeah.
And there's these miles of distance in between what I just said. So they push us away, they call us judgmental, they say we're talking down to them, and then when we do nothing, then they say we don't love them and don't care about them. And as a caregiver, let's call it, for lack of a better word, although I was an alcoholic before I quit, it's frustrating as hell. It's the most helpless feeling in the world as somebody that is a fixer by personality. I like to fix things, to be in a situation where it's unfixable.
Yeah.
It's tough. So, and that's just my bubble. You deal with this every single day. I admire what you do, and I just wonder how you find your why. I mean, what is there something that, obviously I don't want you to be personal on the show, but is there something that is in your past that made you just say, hey, I'm going to go after this because, I don't want what happened to me, that type of thing? Like, obviously that's how I live my life, but where'd you find that inspiration to do what you do every day? Because I have utmost respect and admiration for what you do. It's so difficult to stay at task and to stay optimistic and positive when it seems like to me there's more rejection and more devastation in what you do than there is optimism and good news, right?
Absolutely. The why is very deep and multifaceted, but I can tell you it is undeniable, continuous drive that even though I know that the success rate on severe cases is fairly low, and I know that I work with a severity of illness in which many of the people that I work with, they might go to treatment, they might work a program, but they may never heal. And, that's very difficult, but I have hope in every individual until they no longer have breath. And then after that, I still have hope for the family unit because they're part of it too. I have, and I've posted on this as well, like, do you have to be in recovery? Do you have to be an addicted person who's healed in recovery in order to successfully work with people that are suffering from addiction? And
good question.
I think that that's another stigma in the field, that everyone that's a drug and alcohol counselor, everyone that's an interventionist or is an addict or is in recovery, and I am not.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
and
right.
Now I did grow up in an alcoholic home environment. I'm proud to say that my dad has over 30 years of sobriety and I'm very proud of him. I know, right?
Awesome.
He got clean when I was 13, and that was so obviously a very developmental age there, and I was very influenced by his journey. But I also had, and I don't want to get too personal on this show.
I didn't mean to spring that on you either.
No.
So.
It's okay. It's okay. It's important. I also had an infant daughter who, my first daughter died shortly after birth, and put me into, as anyone can imagine, an extreme mental health crisis and prolonged grief, for which I was prescribed quite a bit of medications. And I developed a dependency on benzodiazepines, somewhat physician driven, but I wasn't doing any of the grief work alongside of it. And so I have firsthand, although I don't identify as an addict, I do identify with someone that has used substances in lieu of doing the work to heal the wound. And that process of dependency and withdrawal was very pivotal in my life, as was the death of my daughter. And that is what led me into a nursing career, to advocate for patients on all levels about their choices, their options, different ways to heal. I was a critical care nurse for the first 10 years of my career. I worked in the intensive care unit. So I didn't initially go into mental health or addiction, but I always tell my students, because I teach nursing students as well, when they say, oh, I don't want to do psych, or I don't want to do mental health, or I don't want to work with addicts. I'm like, well, almost every patient encounter that you have in a hospital or outpatient setting, there will be some mental health component. There will be probably addiction somewhere in the family unit. And so you can't just like, oh, I don't want to do that. It's part of nursing. And I gravitated in the intensive care unit to those kind of patients. So my draw continued to towards wanting to be on the prevention end of things. And even though I work with really severe cases, I still look at it as prevention, because I'm trying to keep them out of a medical
prevent
capacity.
the next thing.
Yeah. So the drive is huge. I
like,
could go on and on.
Yeah. I have a quote I like to say is, when you find your why, you'll find your way. And, you and I both have a why. So our way, it's like the road opened up, and I know the road. I don't know where the hell it's taking me, but I know the road I'm on. And again, as a secular human, I'm non-religious, to me, it didn't fit my life. That to me is an internal driven, inspirational thing. And for those people that are non-secular, it could be a religious experience. And so it doesn't really matter what the reason is behind your why. It's find a why. Find a why. One of the things I tell people that maybe are going through maybe not depression. I'm not a clinical person, so I don't know the terminology, but someone who's floundering in their life, hasn't really found a motivation or a passion. You just haven't looked deep enough to find your why. All of us have a why. There's, it could be a death of a child, like you and I have dealt with. It could be a divorce. It could be a death of a spouse. It could be a death of a parent. It could be a death of a pet. Look how many people go into rescues and things like that for animals because something traumatic happened to their pet. So we all have a why. We just have to find it. It's in there. And that's one of my jobs that I feel like I'm compelled to do, is try to get people to pull that why out of them. Let me ask you something about harm reduction and the legalization of marijuana and also the psychedelic research out there. I'm trying to find somebody to get on my show that is an innovator or a researcher or somebody in the psychedelic space, because full disclosure, I've never done psychedelics. I smoked marijuana 2 times in college, and I threw up both times because I was drunk. So I have no drug experience, yet I know that the inevitability of marijuana is coming. And I tell my kids and all the young kids I speak to regularly, just because something's legal doesn't mean you have to do it. Just because you're 21 doesn't mean you have to go out and get smashed. That's a ridiculous stigma that I think parents have to start outgrowing. Is posting pictures on Facebook of your son or daughter at the bar doing shots of tequila is an embarrassment to the type of parent that you are, in my opinion. You can share a glass of Cabernet with them, but there's no reason to post that on social media. It just becomes comical. I got off track there, but going back to harm reduction, the legalization of marijuana and psychedelics, we can fight this and say no, 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 or we could say, I'm open-minded. I want to learn about these things so I can weed out the BS and take the good with me. So where do you stand on all that stuff?
Oh, wow. Well, that's just a loaded one there, Jeff. So I'll start with...
I told you I have no outline. I just make up stuff in my ADD brain.
I didn't approve this question. No, I've got it. So I'll start with the easy one. So psychedelics. I think that one's easier than marijuana, actually. Psychedelics.
Okay.
So I put a lot of effort into staying up with current research, trying to understand what's going on, just so I'm not blindsided by clients, because as you know, someone in active addiction can be quite savvy and manipulative, and they'll start throwing research studies on me that I'm like, wait, what are you even talking about? So it's part of my professional development and my job to stay up on things. But with psychedelics, I am intentionally naive, if you will, because I don't think we have gotten far enough into it.
Me too.
To know exactly what the impact's going to be. Now, I have read case studies of people that with depression and complex trauma, where in a controlled environment, it has been effective for them. But what we don't know is exactly who it's going to be effective for. And so in a culture where we're all seeking instant things, we're still avoiding the underlying thing. We still need to do the work. Like you can get an antidepressant, you can get an hallucinogen, you can get a benzo. I think we're trying to put Band-Aids, more and more Band-Aids on these wounds that we have as a culture and as individuals. And so I'm not a big fan of more medication. And I would put hallucinogens in a medical category. Now I think there will be a place for it, and I really hope it stays in the right hands. And that's kind of where I stand on that. I'm kind of waiting and seeing. But I also think that adolescents in particular, teenagers, are grasping onto that as, see, I knew it was okay. Because they're not going to the scientific journals. They're hearing, hallucinogens can be effective. And so now we've got a whole culture of information overload, and the adolescent brain's going to pick out whatever's favorable. That's how they learn.
Sure.
They think, woo, this can be helpful. So do you want a 16-year-old who has depression and suicidal ideation to be thinking that LSD or any hallucinogen might be beneficial?
Yeah.
So we have to look at how society is going to interpret it. And I don't want any adolescent doing any sort of psychedelic for any sort of mental health problem at all.
No, I agree. I get you there. And that's why I pose that question, because I am naive as well. I have no medical background. My dad's a doctor, but he's 88 and has been out of the industry for a long time. But he's very knowledgeable in these things. But the research I see, obviously, it's probably presented to me on a biased platform, depending on who I'm reading.
Right.
But it seems like there's some interesting research in regards to psychedelics for end of life, as opposed to morphine and things like that, that can make people leave, that can die with dignity and less pain and actually kind of have their faculties and not be just drugged up. Alzheimer's research, there's some early research that I can see out there. And then ADD, which then caught my attention because my son Seth had ADD, diagnosed at 15, was given Adderall. And Adderall was the beginning of the end of the life of my son. And I'm not blaming the medical profession,
No.
but if I were to reverse engineer this all the way back to where I saw the beginning of his unraveling, it was that diagnosis at 15 for ADD. And I have ADD more than my son had. And I've never been diagnosed anything. I always kind of took ADD as I was lucky to have it. I felt sorry for the kids that weren't hyper and intense and fidgeted. And I did. My whole life, I still feel sorry for adults that don't have the energy I have. And I don't know where it comes from, but it's been a superpower to me. So I'm teaching kids with ADD, screw what anyone tells you, dude. You are luckier than hell to have this because you can take energy out of kids. You sure in hell can't put it in them. And if you're born with it, it is your superpower.
It is
but again, it needs to be massaged. It needs to be nurtured. It needs to be able to kind of turn it on and turn it off when you need it. You need to learn how to tune it down, which meditation and things like that has really helped my ADD immensely. So anyway,
it's off.
I don't know where I'm going with that.
Topic, but have you ever read the book? And I can't think of the author. Hunter in a Farmer's World.
I will. I'm writing it down.
And I can send you the author.
Not.
Hunter in a Farmer's World, and it's about embracing how parents can help their kids embrace the gifts of ADHD. And my son has ADHD,
and they are gifts.
And we are honing the gifts versus trying to squash the behaviors. Because when you rise anyone, when you pull the potential out of anyone, negative behaviors can often dissipate a bit. So it's been, you should read it. I think you would really like it.
Yep. I will.
But I'm not.
But it's no different than taking someone. No, I'm going to get there. But it's no different than taking someone that doesn't have ADD and someone who has ADD. Well, someone who doesn't have ADD can have just as many problems, the fact that he doesn't have ADD, as those that have problems with ADD. So again, to me, a label would be you don't have ADD. That's a label as well. So it just depends how we frame things, and that comes from my Stoic philosophy readings. It's all how we frame things in our mind. Our mind is so powerful. The cognitive biases that are out there, the stories we tell ourselves, like you say, we cherry pick data, we confirmation bias, all these things that go hand in hand with mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. All right, marijuana, your turn. So
I recently traveled. Okay, I'm going to start with a story. I traveled to a few states, some of which have legalized marijuana. More and more so. So I'm walking in, and I won't even say where, but I'm walking in, it's middle of the afternoon. It's walking through like a city park, doing touristy type things. I was by myself, feeling like super independent, checking out shops, and just whiffs of marijuana almost on every corner. And who did I see? I saw families pushing strollers. I saw, business folks. I saw couples. This wasn't like a hippie bonfire. This was like just normal life. And, it's no different than walking down the street with your beer cooler, right? Like we're all like, and I saw this in multiple places, in multiple cities. And particularly I travel to Denver, Colorado a lot. And that's one of those where you'll see that quite a bit. And I'm thinking, legal or not, what are we doing? What are we escaping from? This, so we can't have
that's a great way to look at it.
Open bottles. There's open container laws. You can't just cruise down the street in some of these cities, with your wine jug. Yet people are partaking and going out in the community. They're crossing streets. They're driving cars. They're parenting their kids. They're working. They're handling money and food at restaurants. And I don't see how that is at all acceptable. It's not acceptable with cigarettes. It's not acceptable with alcohol even. And I'm really concerned for this movement of it's totally okay to smoke marijuana and go about your daily life. Now, I'm not going to argue with people that drink in moderation at appropriate times with appropriate people and have appropriate actions. Nor am I going to fuss at people that follow that same principle with a legalized substance such as marijuana. But there's no way I'm going to engage in any sort of discussion that it's safe to work, drive, care for minor children while you're under the influence. It's just absurd to me. So I'm having a really hard time. I'm having a hard time with it.
No, I get it. I am too. And there's a particular reason why I name my nonprofit the Choices Network and not the I'm Sober Network or Clean Living Network. Or it's all about choices. And I was going to ask you something. Have you read the book Mental Immunity by Andy Norman? So
No.
I'll recommend a book back to you.
Okay, very good.
It's called Mental Immunity. It's a very clinical, kind of a deep written book that I'm listening on the audiobook version, but I'm not really hip with the guy they hired to read the book. He sounds it sounds like a computer generated. It sounds like a computer generated type voice. Very, I don't know. I think it's less inspiring than if. So I may just go back to reading it.
Too.
Yeah, it just kind of like, dude, you wrote this great book, but the person reading it just is, I don't know. Anyway, so but what he talks about in this book, and this is where I think I'm going to make a comment about what you said about marijuana, and I'm in agreement with you, is building up. We have mind viruses. We have things that poison our brains. We have things such as, if it's legal, then I need to do it, or something where our approach is kind of backwards. And he talks about, do we as a society, or maybe you as a parent, or you as an RN, and maybe this is not a fair question to you because I don't know if you have much of a choice in this, but I do. Do I want to go after Big Pharma? Do I want to go after the drug cartels? Do I want to go after the states that are legalizing marijuana? Or, as you said, do I want to go after the demand side of the problem? Why are these kids even doing these things in the first place? So we have a big vaping problem in Iowa. I'm sure you do too in Idaho. Vaping in our high school, I think 2 years ago, they confiscated or 3 years ago when vaping just came out, like in one day over 100 vapes. Now it's probably 1,000. But I tell my boys constantly, and alcohol is the best example, Amy. Super Bowl, all these ads. Every day there's alcohol ads. Yet, just when you turn 21 or whatever age it is, 22, it certainly doesn't mean you have to go do it. And so with marijuana coming legal, I think if we can get more kids to think that way, hey, just because I go down the street and every corner selling it and my dad smokes it and my mom smokes it and there's commercials on TV, I certainly don't have to do it. I don't have to go to McDonald's and eat a Big Mac.
Right.
I certainly don't have to go to the grocery store and buy wine. So how can we cherry pick and say, well, it's legal, so now I feel like I have to do it? And that's where I think the sweet spot is in this whole thing. If we want to fix these numbers that are all going in the wrong direction, it's not that I'm giving up on middle-aged America or even college-age America. We need to get to the 12, 13, or 14-year-olds and figure out why in the hell are they deciding these things are good decisions, legal or not, when there's other ways to deal with the stresses of life, many more productive, efficient ways. So I'm a demand side advocate. And that's where Patrick Moore. That's where Patrick Moore really hit my. Yeah, because I read this book after I met Patrick, and I've always been like, I don't have the heart in me to chase Big Pharma. I don't want to change the drug laws. I think the drug laws are the problem. I think that war on drugs has been a colossal failure. Yeah. And I was going to ask you about my first thing about harm reduction too. I want to make sure we cover your thoughts on harm reduction. But I'm a demand side. I want to try to figure out why people. I know why. You know why they're doing it. It's less exploration and more escaping. right?
Yeah. Well, I think with
Escaping.
adolescence, it can be exploring,
Oh yeah,
because
on
adolescents
adolescence,
are,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
they're prone to that. So that's where Patrick's work is so instrumental, is getting to people
Yeah,
about, ahead of time, about their own decision making process, their own ability to be, to measure the benefit and the risk of their actions, and start getting them thinking
yeah,
about the decisions they're making. Because if you are
right,
impulsive and you're explore, and talk about ADHD, higher prevalence of
right,
substance use, because you're firing all the time. And if you're
right,
not finding a way to channel that, or you're not seeing any negative consequence from using a substance, okay, especially an adolescent.
right,
Oh, I was fine that
right,
time. Let me do it again 5 times harder. If one joint was good,
right.
let me try five. I mean, it just becomes exponential
Right.
in an adolescent mind. And then I think it does become escaping for a large pot
Right.
of those kids. But I don't think it always starts that way. And that's why I
And that's
love,
why you and Patrick, I wanted you guys on my live stream because I kind of, in my mind, and maybe I'm looking at this wrong, but it's like Patrick's working with that, first set of kids coming up that haven't made those decisions yet, but those decisions are coming. And you're working on the onlines of those people that have made those poor choices. I mean, that's what you're spending most of your day in. So the combination of you two is like the ultimate company. It's like, you basically could deal with any human being on the planet, the two of you, because you're either going to be before you make these choices or you're going to be living after you make these choices.
yeah. And I always say,
And
please,
that's what,
somebody put me out of a job. I have
yeah,
no
exactly.
issue saying,
Exactly.
I mean, who wants, I mean, I like to do it because I can do it, and because I believe everyone
Right.
deserves a chance. But it's makes far more sense to get in front of it than to just deal with it at the end stage.
But then when
So
those slip through, when the millions of people slip through,
they need someone.
there has to be people like you out there. Yeah, and you are a I don't know what you do. I don't do what you do, Amy. I'm a dad in Iowa that's pissed off, and I'm passionate, and I'm in a position where with my previous career, which I retired pretty much immediately after Seth died, that I'm in a position where I can give back. I'm not doing any of this for money. I've never made a penny on anything I've done in what I'm doing. I see ultimate authenticity. And I'm not saying this to toot my horn, but every single penny I've made on everything I've ever done, which is basically my book sales, have gone into my nonprofit, which I don't take any income from. The Living Undeterred idea that I'm doing in May next year, all 50 states, I want to raise $1 million. I'm not making one penny on any of that. Anything that does come in is going in my nonprofit, or it's going back to the 50 states. So why I brought that up, I don't know.
Because it's awesome,
ADD is a
because you're in a
curse and a blessing.
position you're in a position to be able to do that, and you've recognized
Right,
that. I mean, you put yourself in that position by establishing a lucrative and successful business, and you could very easily continue to
right,
chase
right,
money. But you've taken that
right,
hard work and that fortunate part of your life, and you're able to serve your passion. And not everyone is able to do that. Not everyone has that
right.
ability. So the
Most
fact that
people
you're
can't, and I understand that
right,
completely. Right,
and so the fact that you're
right,
out there willing to do that, I mean, I'm grateful, because I can't do that. Not at this point. So the more people like you that are
but we
able to
can
be,
together. That's why.
yeah,
Right. And that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head, Amy. That's why I think this podcast is so important. That's why what you post on LinkedIn is so important. That's why when I make posts, it's so important that we can start like a I don't want to use a black hole analogy because that's negative, but it's like a force where we can pull people together and we can get the Patrick Moores and the Brian Walls and the Nancy Barrows and you and me, and we can put ourselves together. And I am just in a position where I can literally go out now to the country, and I can knock on doors. I can do all this without any aspirations for political office. I'm not raising money to enrich myself. It's like I want to hear stories about the people you meet every single day. And I want to use what I'm doing as a platform to shoot this out. So there's some young couple out there with a 15-year-old. I don't want to ever have to have someone go through what I've been through. And this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. And I am in such a good place emotionally. I cry and I'm sad, and I go through all these frickin' stupid grieving things that I'm told to do, but I am a happy person. I'm at peace. I love my life. I love the people I'm with. But man, it's painful. It's extremely painful. And I can only imagine what you deal with every day. I just, like I said, I can shut this off. You can't. I mean, you're dealing with people every day, and there's millions of people like you just in the world, and hundreds of thousands of people that are helping others. And, I'm going with this is, the people in my life that I have lost truly die when I stop talking about them, and I won't let that happen on my watch. And I have a feeling you're the same way. And where I was going with this before I got all emotional was that
it was so good, by the way.
There's another person.
Yeah.
There's another person out there like me that hasn't got that call yet. And I'm like, man, what can I do to get to that kid to get them to realize that heroin's a really stupid frickin' idea, and that putting something up your nose is not a good idea. And so I don't know. I'm not a tortured soul, Amy. I'm very content with where I'm at.
No,
but man, there's so many people. There's so many people like us out there.
And you're exhibiting very healthy responses and emotions. I mean, not that you need my validation, but I wouldn't expect you to be able to have a conversation like this and not have it bring up the emotions that drive your passion. I mean, that's why you're good at what you do and why you're going to have such an impact. You brought up reaching the kid, and I totally agree with that. I get torn because we still somehow need to reach those parents, because children are so, and Patrick might disagree some, and that's why I adore him, because we can go back and forth about this.
Right.
But, and this is where I will talk about research. What kids are trying first is alcohol and weed. And I won't get into the gateway discussion, but once you open that up, the literature, the long-term literature supporting that they're more likely to engage in harder drugs in their early 20s. So if we're looking at a normalized family where daily drinking is part of life, dad gets home from work and drinks beers till he passes out, and mom gets home and drinks wine.
Yep.
You can still tap into kids and try to create some autonomy there, but you're working constantly like this if they're in that environment,
right?
And that's where I struggle, and where I try to want to provide education to parents, because I'm not sure that all parents out there that are doing that, are addicts. I think some of them are in negative behavior cycles where they're just drinking just every day just because. So maybe they don't meet the criteria to go into treatment, but they certainly meet the criteria to be a better parent. What they're modeling is, well, of course, if that's what you see and all adolescents want to do is be adults because they don't understand that they're having a great time as is. They want to be adults. And if what adult equals is having a job and coming home and drinking cocktails, we're setting up an aspiration that when you become an adult, you drink. And so I don't know if just going at the youth is always going to work, because we're like, again, and I think I look so much at the people that fall through. Like, yes, if we can grab those youth and they can make great decisions, bam, we need you talking to them. But what about all those that come through that net and they're living in these undesirable... I think I can do a lot of work in regards to parents that are, not necessarily, like I said, alcoholics or addicts, but they're unintentionally escaping their own life and demonstrating escapism as the way to deal with stress. They're not demonstrating healthy coping. They're not coming home and saying, I had a really bad day. I'm going to do some yoga. They're...
Do you think some of this stems from the fact that the default expectation of humans is a fantasy or an illusion? And what I mean by that is we wake up in the morning and we just think, okay, it's going to be uneventful. I'm going to just get up and go to the store. I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to call my parents and stuff. And that goes that way for a while. And then the inevitability of death shows up on your front doorstep. And for kids, they've been coddled and protected. And, we have books on everybody poops, but we don't have books on everybody dies. And so we don't teach kids on death is part of life. And so it's a traumatic experience. And so we have this default expectations where we just don't expect things to happen. And all these things that happen to us, I write in my most recent blog about this. There's never been a human being in the history of humans that hasn't had some grief or trauma or something happen to them. So what makes you think you're unique or you have some special deal with somebody where you can avoid all this? And I think the thing I learned, I had Antarctic Mike ask me he came out and did a documentary a month ago or so before my wife died, and asked me, what's the one nugget you would give, Jeff? The one word you would give to increase the well-being for humans. And I thought, well, shit, that's a big one,
Whoa.
And yeah, I mean, give me a harder one next time, Mike, will you? And I thought, okay, I know what it is. I know what the answer is. Preparedness. Prepare for the inevitable chaos and unfair and unjust and unkind curveballs that life is going to throw at you. It's part of living. It's part of the deal we made when we were born.
Yep.
Yet, I don't think that that's how people look at life. I think they have imposter syndrome.
We have to fix it.
Parents have imposter. Yeah, and everything's a quick fix, and nothing will ever happen to me. My kids aren't going to die. My spouse isn't going to die. My parents aren't going to die. And it's like Mike Tyson said. Everybody has a great plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
And I think our inability to cope with the inevitability of what happens in life is one of the big problems that we have as a society, and social media and all these things are not helping. Thoughts on that?
I agree. One of the things that I do, I can just speak for myself, and I encourage this with my families I work with, is it is okay to show and share unpleasant emotions with your children. Children don't have any issue throwing a tantrum or being mad or being sad. They're innately very expressive, and at some point we temper that, oh, don't cry or don't do this. And we model that as well. if I have a bad day, you know, my boys are young. They're my youngest is about to be 7 and my oldest is 10. So I mean, I make it age appropriate, but if I have a bad day, I have a choice. You know, I guess I could take a pill or booze it up or go isolate myself.
Right.
Or I can come home and say,
Right.
which is very vulnerable and sometimes difficult, and sometimes they know if you're not okay, right? So to say, boys,
Right. Right.
you know, mommy's a nurse, mommy had a hard case today, and I'm feeling kind of powerless, and I'm feeling kind of upset, and it doesn't feel good. And it's okay, and can I have a hug? And showing that positive, not putting your crap on your kids, I'm not suggesting that, but
Right.
it being okay to not be okay. We have this society where it's like, oh, everything has to be pleasurable and happy. Well, who says? I mean, not the life I've lived. Everything hasn't been pleasant and perfect. And we don't have to shield our
Nancy
kids.
Barrows said, I know you know Nancy, and Nancy Barrows, and she said something like, "There's comfort in the discomfort zone," or something to that effect, where you can find comfort in discomfortable situations. Or I'm not sure how she phrased it, but that's kind of what you're saying, is showing vulnerability. You know, I just broke down and cried. I have an overwhelming sense of awe and reverence for death and life. And but for me, it's like using the restroom. It's just a daily thing for me. And I'm you know, as a man, as a 55-year-old male, I cry in front of people all the time. And I am now starting to see some of my male friends exhibit more open feelings. Almost like I open the door. I open the door for them that, hey, it's okay to feel like crap and cry. But, you know, we need to just put that in a box quickly and move on. Now, I don't mean move on as in forget, but move on as absorb into our story. And I write about that frequently, and I know I read your stuff, and at one point you had talked about something about the grieving process isn't getting over it. That's a stigma. You know, I don't want to get over it. If anything, just the opposite. I want to be out chasing it. You know, I want to have it pulling me in a positive direction. And that absorb word always sticks in my head. It's like, I want to absorb all the things that happen to me into my life. And I think what I'll do as I wrap this up is, what advice would you give to people out there watching this podcast that are really struggling, Amy? What words of wisdom? Obviously, if they're not near you and they can't get a hold of you, obviously people can get a hold of you and ask for some help. But if they really want to get some help, how do you get this down to a couple things to say to people to help them off the ledge?
So there's so many resources out there that we're afraid or resistant or unaware of to utilize. It takes a lot of courage, especially when you're in a bad spot, right? So you're depressed or you're using or you're in a shame and guilt cycle. It takes a lot of courage to reach out to someone, anyone. And so it seems like ridiculous to say, well, if you're struggling, ask for help. But it truly is the most pivotal thing that one can do. Because once you share that with somebody else, it begins to lose its power. It really does. And so just as simple as yesterday, I was having a very bad day, and I simply reached out to someone and said, I am not, and it wasn't my best friend, my mom, my spouse, it was a friend. I said, I am not okay. And just getting validated and getting that emotion I was having began to lose power, and I started to get empowered again. So my website has tons of free resources that, you know, helplines, support groups, etc. There are things now with telemedicine that can be if you can't walk into an AA group, which I understand takes a lot of courage, there's anonymous online groups where you can hear other people's stories or share yours as just a voice.
Right.
And any sharing of that is a positive step. Even if you don't make any other changes other than speaking the truth, you're starting to get real with yourself.
Right.
And you can go with that. I had someone ask me on LinkedIn today, they said, well, what about the people that don't have money for treatment, Amy? What about, insurance doesn't always pay for things? And I say, that's what I do.
Right.
I get creative. And yes, my assessment piece costs money, but not a lot. And with that, you get a slew of options. And it's not always going to treatment for 30 days. And so anything that I can do to tell people that the stigma of you have to put your hand up and say you're an addict and then go to treatment, lock yourself away in some shameful environment.
Yep.
There are other ways to do it. There are other ways to get well.
Yeah, there are.
And there are people like you and I that know what it's like to feel at the bottom. And aren't going to judge. We're out there. There's tons of us out there.
What's the best way for people to reach you and to learn more about what you do? We're all about connectivity. So, throw out there how people can get a hold of you, Amy, because I'm sure after this you'll have a lot of people that are, at a minimum be wanting to follow what you do on social media.
Yeah. So the only social media I'm really active on is LinkedIn, and I put a lot of effort into getting to know the people that engage with my content. And I love when people DM me and ask questions. It doesn't always result in retaining my services, but I can really point people in the right direction, or at least offer some words of hope. So I would love it if anyone watching would follow me on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, I answer my comments and I answer my DMs. And if I think that I can help you on a professional service level, I'll let you know. And if I can't, I'll let you know. And I'll give you some resources. My website's loaded, holisticinterventionist.com. It's loaded with resources that I update that clients have found useful.
I've been on it, yeah.
So it's got a lot of different, it's not just all the stuff I like. It's stuff that I try to take a sampling of what other people have told me have been helpful. If podcasts are your thing, they're on there.
I wanted
books, etc.
I'll have all your contact information linked to my stuff as well. But I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for coming into my life and for educating me on these things. Like I said, I'm just a dad from Iowa that's pissed off, and I want to make a difference, And I'm a sponge. I have more questions than I do answers.
So do I, though.
But
so
I am definitely.
That's a good thing.
I'm definitely excited about the future. The Living Undeterred U.S. tour next summer. I'm so excited, and I'm happy that you've become a sponsor for the state of Idaho. You're my key contact. So I will be meeting you at some point when I go around the country next summer.
I cannot wait to introduce you.
We're going to raise a lot of awareness.
I can't wait. I got excited. I can't wait to introduce you to some of the amazing people doing work here in Idaho. We've got stuff going on that I want you to see. So I'm really excited for all the states to get to meet you.
Well, together we can make a difference, certainly. And like I said, I just think we're getting started. After the tour is over, I've got other projects. I've got bigger and better things to raise awareness. And I want to meet people like you that I've not met. I want to meet the innovators, the free thinkers, the investors. I want to meet the entrepreneurs. I want to meet the frontline RNs, the people that are in the trenches. So with that, thank you very much, Amy. I enjoyed this. It was an honor, and
likewise.
I'm excited about our paths crossing shortly. Again, thank you very much for being on the Living Undeterred podcast.
Thank you, Jeff.